Now, before we leave these special forms of the infinitive construct, we should mention that when you add preposition la to them, to say to approach, you don't have to write the la as you might think you would from the English translation. But if you do, the preposition la is pointed with a kamats before infinitive constructs that have the accent on the first syllable or only have one syllable. So again, these siglet type forms, so if you have the infinitive form geshet, if you want to add preposition la to it, it's legeshet with a kamats. And likewise, tate becomes latate. Now, when you add pronominal suffixes on these infinitives, they do behave like the siglets again. So if you have geshet, approaching, add an e to make it my approaching, well, you'll end up with a gish e, where kind of like an I-class siglet. And the same thing if you have sa'at, journeying, and you want to make it my journeying, you'll add a heric yod. But then because this is more of an A-class siglet because of the gutter roll, you'll get sati as my journeying. And for nasa to lift up, you get sate as the infinitive, lifting up. When you add the heric yod, though, you end up with soti for whatever reason. And then with tate, to give, if you add a suffix, my giving, you end up with an e. And what will happen here is that the sere becomes a heric, and you get a dagesh there for the assimilated noon that kind of comes back when you add another syllable onto the end, and you end up with a tt. So that's all cows, complication in the cow stems with first noon verbs. There are also issues that come with the nifal. The nifal perfect and participle forms of the first noon verb will have the noon assimilating into the next radical and being represented by a dagesh forte. So if you have a nifal perfect of natan, to give, you want to say he or it was given, it would be theoretically nin tam, but then the noon assimilates into the tav, and you end up with nit tan. Now, this is very easily confused with the cow first common plural, which would be a nitain with a sere. And so which vowel you choose changes the meaning entirely, because nitain would be we will give, whereas nitan means it was given, or the like. But anyway, in these nifal forms, the noon assimilates into the tav with natan all the way through. And you'll also get the final noon assimilating into the endings in certain forms, like you have you were given, it would be nit tata, where the noon assimilates into the tav at the end. So you got two assimilated noons in this form. The first noon, the noon that you see is the noon of the nifal. The noon of the root has assimilated into the middle consonant tav, and the final noon has assimilated into the ending. The participle, would have started off nin-tan, but then it becomes nitan. Participle has a long A kamats. And on down the list, the noon assimilates in some cases to the final noon also assimilates into the ending. Now, if the second consonant of the root is a guttural, then the noon is not going to be able to assimilate. In such cases, you will get either the noon being written, or there'll be compensatory lengthening, or there'll be virtual doubling. So if you take a pretty common word, nacham, which in the nifal means to be sorry, or show compassion, the form should be nin ham in the nifal. But when you try to assimilate the noon into the chet, it spits it right out, goes off in outer space, as I imagine it, and you end up with virtual doubling rather than actually showing it. Now, Ross actually points out that the form niham could also be a PL perfect, and only context can tell you whether it's to be interpreted as a PL or as a nifal, the meaning that would best fit the context. Now, the remaining nifal forms, the first noon verbs, follow the regular pattern. So in the imperfect, you have third masculine singular of natan would be yin natain, and basically you nail down the noon with a doubling and a vowel that follows, so it's not, right up against another consonant, and so it does not go away in the imperfect forms or in the imperative forms or in the infinitive forms. It turns out you'll also get assimilation of the noon and first noon verbs in the hiphil. So with the perfect, the hypothetical form should be hin gid for nagad in the hiphil, which means report or tell. But the noon assimilates into the gimel, and you get a doubling there. And that's how that would work. Same thing with the imperfect. You should have a yan gid, but then the noon assimilates and you get yagid. And same thing with the jussive, same thing with the imperative, same thing with the participle. The noon in each case assimilates into the following consonant. The same thing proves to be true with the hafal. The hypothetical form should be for the hafal hon god, but you end up with hugad, where the noon assimilates and it goes from the short o vowel to the short u vowel, a slight change from kamatz hatuf to kibbutz. O and u interchange in this language relatively easily. And so that is, it was reported. And then the imperfect, same sort of thing happens, where the O vowel becomes a kibbutz U vowel, and you get the assimilation of the noon. Yugad, which would mean it will be reported. And mugad, the participle, something reported, the noon assimilates. And likewise, the infinitive construct and the infinitive absolute follow this same assimilation of the noon pattern. Now, it turns out there is a verb that is not a first noon that behaves like a first noon, and that's the verb lakah. Lakah means to take. And in this case, it's not the noon, but the lamed that's going to assimilate. Now, in the perfect, it would be regular, But in the imperfect, again, the hypothetical form would have been yil ka. Because of the het, you get a theme vowel in the imperfects of this verb. It should have been a yil ka, but then the lamed assimilates to the kof, and you get yik ka, and no lamed. Lamed disappears. Though if you, again, were to look at the kof under the microscope and magnify it up, 10,000 times, you'll find that that dot in the kof is really a little bitty lamed. Now, another thing that comes up if you look down here at the second feminine singular form and the other forms that put a shabah under the middle consonant, third masculine plural, second masculine plural, wherever you put a shabah under the kof, you're going to lose the doubling. You're going to lose the dagesh. And this, as it turns out, is an application of the old Skiman-Levy rule. If you have any kind of a sibilant plus a kof or a mem or a nun or a lamed or a vav or a yod with a dagesh in it, a doubling, followed by vocal shabah, you will often lose your gemination. You will often lose your doubling. And that's precisely what happens. It's an application of the Skiman-Levy rule in those forms. Goes on to give you other forms. The preterite, along with the vav consecutive, the lamed assimilates. The imperative, if you take the second person form, you have tika, drop the t, you end up with ka. And all these other forms are pretty much the form of the imperfect in the second person, drop the t, and that's the form that you get. And as you drop the t, you also lose whatever doubling that you might have had otherwise, so the dagesh goes away. The infinitive construct form will add a t at the end to compensate for losing the lamed at the beginning and treat what's left as if it were a sigilet, so you get kahat as your infinitive construct form, and were you to add a suffix to it, it becomes kahti, my taking. Now, the lamed does not assimilate in the nifal system, and so you actually will see the lamed nil ka in the perfect, and the yil ka in the imperfect of the nifal, and the imperative form. Those do not change. Say a few words about the vocabulary and the exercises. So he introduces a number of first nun verbs. Nava, which occurs in the PL, meaning to look, and occurs in the hifiel, meaning also to look or to gaze. And then you have naga, which generally occurs in the hifiel, means to tell or declare. And then you have naga, to touch or to strike. And then you can see in the imperfect, you will assimilate the nun into the following root. The infinitive construct is like a sigilet with a t at the end. Nagash, to approach, draw near. Pretty straightforward. And then you have nadar, to vow. And again, the nun assimilates. And then you have naham in the nifal, meaning to be sorry or to repent or have compassion. And again, you get virtual doubling in the perfect nifal perfect. Also has a PL form, which is identical to the perfect of the nifal. And then you have natsal, to be delivered in the nifal, and to deliver, save in both the PL and the hifiel. You have ozen, which is ear, body part, usually dual, oznayim, pair of ears. And then lashon, tongue or language. Mateh is a staff or a tribe. Neder, related to the verb above, meaning a vowel, two spellings of it. Rosh is head, top or chief. Sheker is a deception or a lie or vanity. And then finally, rak, meaning only or except.